in the museum. Excellent. I'm alone here in the museum here, but I hope you can hear me, and I hope you'll engage with me via the chat or hand signals or anything that can confirm that you are actually able to see us and hear us. And thank you for recording it, Emily. Hopefully it's something that people can use at a later date if they're interested. I would love to find out who has been to the Birthplace. So if you have been either to Scotland or Dunfermline, please pop that in the chat. It'd be really good for us to find out who's in the room, as far as if anyone has been to the space itself or has anything they'd like to talk about at the end of it. More than happy to take questions. I thought it'd be quite fun because the place is empty, that we'll try a little bit of technology, jiggery-pokery, in as much as I'm going to take you a wee walk around the cottage itself. So set your goggles to a little bit of seawardness, a little bit of ship-shaped travel as we go up and down the stairs, but I'll try and keep it as steady as possible. So the first thing I'm going to do is share the screen and show you a few pretty pictures, far prettier than my face. And can everybody, or Emily, could you please confirm for me that you can see a slide that says Andrew Carnegie Birthplace Museum?
Yep, you are all good.
And thank you very much. This is it. Relatively compact, I think, compared to what I've heard about the Homestead Library. And I believe there's many other libraries represented here. What I would like you to get out of this evening is, if you've not visited us before, is a thirst and a desire to come and visit us. We would love to have you. We are a free venue to come and visit. And when we talk about the Carnegie family, as far as trusts go, there's 22 organizations, all started and linked to Carnegie himself. And we are privileged enough to be one of those. So we are the big red box that's over here. I'm not sure if you can see my cursor, but the big red box here, Carnegie Dunfermline Trust, is our managing trust. They are an organization that was started by Carnegie in 1903, just after he bought the park, Pittencrieff Park, which we call the Glen. It's a 76-acre green area just beyond, just beside the cottage over there. And when he purchased it, he talked about that being the best purchase of his life, because he was also called the Laird of Pittencrieff, which the Lord of Pittencrieff, which was a title that he had never had before. And because the park had been private lands up until Andrew Carnegie purchased it, the local population were not really allowed in there. And so as a wee boy, he lived right beside it and he was never allowed in it. And so when he got a chance to buy it, he was very chuffed, very pleased and overawed at the opportunity, and he immediately opened the gates and gifted it to the public of Dunfermline at that time. And the following month, he set up this trust, gifted it initially $2.5 million US in bonds, but he then increased it to $3.75 million US bonds. And that funding, that endowment, continues to help fund all sorts of projects in Dunfermline. His own words were he wanted to bring sweetness and light to the people of Dunfermline, because when he had visited back in 1881, it had become quite an industrial town. There was only maybe 4,000 people living in it at the time, but when he had left in 1848, it had not been as industrial as it had become, with the mills and the linen works and all the associated factories to do with linen making. So he wanted to bring sweetness and light to the people of Dunfermline. The other ones in here you may be familiar with, as far as Carnegie Hall, the Carnegie Museums of Pittsburgh, there is the Carnegie Library of Pittsburgh included, the Corporation of New York. These are all organizations that my boss engages with, and whenever they come to town, we love to show them the USP, the unique selling point that we have in Dunfermline, and that is the cottage of his birth. To give you an idea, Scotland is above England, a separate country within the United Kingdom. And Dunfermline is situated, again, I'm not sure if you can see the cursor, but it's just to the top left of Edinburgh. So if you find Edinburgh, and then you move up to about 11 o'clock on a clock, you'll see the wee town of Dunfermline. We're very lucky in as much as recently the Queen in June last year, a celebration of her Jubilee, granted Dunfermline city status. So we are now at the same table as Dundee, Edinburgh, Aberdeen, Inverness, Stirling, Glasgow and Perth. And Dunfermline has always referred to itself as a city, but now we're really chuffed to be that city. And it is creating a lot more interest in what we can offer for visitors, like some of you who may wish to come over from America. So at this point, we should have a look at the cottage. This is what it looked like late 1890s. What you'll see on the left-hand side of the cottage, there is a little shed, a little workshop off the side of it. That is no longer there. We don't know who used that shed. We do have an intriguing story of the cottage before the Carnegies had it, about 1810, 1815. There was an inventor who lived in Dunfermline called William Cant. Sometimes he called himself William Kent, which makes it really hard to research him. But he's allegedly lived in Moody Street as well, which is the name of the street that the cottage is on. And he is somebody who invented an on-water tricycle. So this is 1810, 1820. This is before you have bikes on the roads, before you have wheels and chains and all the penny farthings that came afterwards. He has this trike that has got sort of three buoys, buoys, I think you call them, three flotation devices that were powered by some pebbles.
Join the meeting.
Powered by some pedals. And he was so chuffed and pleased with his invention when King George came to visit Edinburgh in 1823. He cycled along the Leith docks, the water just beside Edinburgh, to show the king his invention. Somebody has done a huge amount of research, one of his descendants, and they think this cottage is also where he had his workshop. So perhaps the lean-to on the left-hand side of the cottage, which is no longer there, that could have been a workshop for William Cant. But it's no longer there, and actually there's now a window, which I will show to you in the birth room itself, which is where the roof of that workshop extra part of the building is, and it creates a bit more light in the space for us as well. So I will come out of shared screen and I will ask Emily to pop me onto the other screen. I will mute myself here. Can everybody? That? Yes, excellent. I'm going to switch on the camera and I will flip the camera around. Okay. So here is our lovely shop. We're going to wander all the way through. Just outside there is and that door is equivalent to, if I swing you around, to this is the picture you've just been looking at. And the cottage behind me, the door behind me is the black door on the right-hand side. Traditional weaver cottages had two families. So two families are living in here. I'm going to show you the side that the Carnegies lived on, but their neighbours lived exactly the same way as a mirror image. However, that no longer exists. we have modernized that to create the museum. So when we go into the cottage, the original floorboards, the layout of it is exactly the same. And we think that these cottages were built about 1750, 1780, something like that. Dunfermline had many of these types of cottages for weavers. There's a couple of features which are unique to them, and it would have been built with that in mind. So let us go into the cottage. It is dark in Scotland at this time of night, so we're relying on the lights that we have ourselves throughout the place. So it makes it very atmospheric. I hope you can hear it and you can see it okay. So this is a jacquard loom. This is the type of loom that William Carnegie, who was Andrew's father, would have worked on 8, 10, 12 hours a day, depending on the year. There we go. Thank you very much for the feedback. Hopefully you're seeing that in landscape now. The jacquard loom would have been clickety clackety, working all the hours possible. So the weaver, in our case, William Carnegie, could produce some Dunfermline type linen. So you can see the pattern there. It's very delicate. There's only 2 colors. So the warp is what's in the machine at the moment. That's all threaded up. And then the weft is created by this shuttle that would fly back and forth, creating the pattern. When this was introduced to Britain in the 1820s by Mr. Jacquard, a Frenchman, he introduced these pattern cards. So you can see them all hanging down here, and they all have holes in them. The same way as binary or how the internet works on ones and zeros, these cards are the same as you would have for your computers in the early 60s and 70s. Cash machines in the UK, this is how it all operated to get your cash out of your ATM machines. And that allowed the weaver to take his mind off the pattern, because the pattern would be generated by the cards. And then he would be able to focus on getting the weave right, the weft across the way correct. And by using, below here, we have 8 pedals. The one on the left-hand side, the far left-hand side, that would move the patterns forwards and backwards. And the ones on the right-hand side move these sheds. That's what these are called, up and down. And that's what then controls whether it's going over or under the weft, which is what you see all lined up there. There's thousands of threads on here. And to keep them all tight and taut, the room would have to be high in humidity, so they would keep the fire burning. So behind me, we do not have our fire burning anymore. That is not good for museums. But it would be burning and there'd be moisture in the room because there's places to hide water. So you see there's a big hole in the floor here for the pedals, and through there's other places we store water to make sure the humidity is high so that the threads don't snap. Because if the threads snap, the weaver has to stop weaving, and time is money. He doesn't get any money until he sells his weaving. This was really popular in America, this Dunfermline linen, so much so that there was a consulate set up in Dunfermline, which helped all the weavers in Dunfermline to prevent them having to go to Edinburgh, which was a 12-hour round trip. There's no bridges in those days. And so that would mean they had to take all the paperwork there to get it all excised and approved for the customs. In 1880, the Americans set up higher trade barriers for linen, and that's when our linen industry started to decline. But what I'm talking about there is power looms and the steam-driven industrial age. Here, 1830, in a wee cottage in Dunfermline, one man is weaving on this machine. William Carnegie was actually a very successful master weaver, so much so that at one point he had 4 looms. So he had 3 apprentices who were working for him and he was training, which was great. However, in the 1840s, the power looms came to Dunfermline, and they meant that they could run 24 hours a day, powered by steam. And so the weaver's skills no longer become as important because they can push out a lot more linen a lot quicker. It may not be to the full fine standard, but it was good enough to earn money for the mill owners. So weavers like William had to try and compete, or had to go and work in those mills and lose their autonomy, lose their creativeness, and no longer be their own boss. So the true definition of a cottage industry is this weaving. You're doing it in your own cottage, you're your own boss, and what you make, you sell. So when the power looms came, it was disaster for people like William Carnegie, and that's when the family started to fall on hard times. They moved away from this cottage, actually to a bigger house in 1840, and he was doing really well. But then by the middle of the 1840s, all of these power looms started to impact on the weavers like William. And it's at that point that they decided they need to have another plan. But let us finish the story of Andrew Carnegie's cottage. So we know that in here, this is the parlour, which if you watch any of the period dramas, their parlour is a lovely place to receive people. Actually, the Carnegies had another loom in here. So William was in the weaving room, the loom room, doing his business, but he was also training an apprentice in here. So an apprentice would pay money to learn the trade, so that's income for William. The apprentice becomes skilled at creating the linen. That's more linen that William can sell, and then is able to create more wealth or more liquidity for his own income. And that apprentice eventually wants to then set up his own machine and set up his own business and go forward. But this was 1840s, as I say, it was the crux of our industrial revolution in Dunfermline, and led to either working in the mill itself or, as the Carnegies did, leave and try and find your fortune elsewhere. So I'm going to go up the stairs now, so I will go as carefully as possible. Please close your eyes if you get seasick. So the only other 2 rooms that this house has is this little room here. So we have this set up with a spinning wheel because Margaret Carnegie, Andrew's mother, William's wife, would have been doing the spinning here to get the linen, which comes from a plant called flax, to create bobbins, or to create the content that goes into the shuttle that goes back and forth. And one interesting feature in this room, over here behind the bunny, hopefully you can see, there is a hatch. So that hatch would be able to be opened up, and the bobbins and such like could be dropped down into the room below, so that there would not be any time lost should there be a requirement for extra bobbins. Another little fireplace in here, but this room and this room are the only ones that would have been up the stairs, and this is mirrored on the opposite side for the other family. So when the Carnegies lived here, we do not know what it looked like. They never took any photographs. They were not affluent enough to do that. But we do know that this desk was returned to this cottage in 1920s from the family who say they bought it off the Carnegies. So for the Carnegies to travel to America, they had to sell everything they owned. So his loom was sold, their possessions were all sold, all the furniture, everything that they weren't able to carry on the boat. They still fell short and they had to borrow some money, but they did pay it back. So this is the only item that we believe
belonged to William Carnegie. And he's also a man who we do not have any photographs of him. We have paintings of family members, we have photos of many of Carnegie's family and his mother, but not of William. So that is the only item that we have. So this is the birth room. I'll show you a picture when I go back downstairs of what this looked like in the turn of the century, just after 1900. But the cottage was purchased by Andrew's wife, Louise, as a 60th birthday gift for Andrew Carnegie. And I'm sure any of you that work in Andrew Carnegie libraries or are familiar with the man can tell us that that year was 1895. So he was born in here, we think in this bed here, 1835. He was the first child. They did have another child in here who they called Anne, but she unfortunately never reached beyond the age of 2, which any historians amongst you will realise that's not uncommon for families to lose children. The healthcare system wasn't necessarily very good, or they didn't know about bacteria, they didn't know diseases. And so they lost Anne, and she's referenced in some of Andrew's writings, but not very many. And then, so this is the bed that Andrew would have slept in, and that's the extra window there. So when he was in here, that window wouldn't have existed. So it would have been a bit darker. It would have been very cozy because there's a good range here, a good fire here for cooking. And so when we talk to the children about it, we have to show them the bathroom. Now you all here all know where the bathroom is, but the bathroom is a little chamber pot, which the youngest or the children would often have to empty out into the garden. But everything else is in here. You've got your working from home scenario, William's doing his paperwork for his work. We have our food, we have our preparation, we have our heating. We do know that his mother, Margaret, was of a family that taught her how to be a cobbler. Her parents were cobblers. And then we have lots of our ironware from the Victorian era, which would have been used extensively. So that is the birthplace. I will take you back downstairs and show you a couple of interesting elements. So this is the sorry, got some feedback there. So this is the Memorial Hall. When Louise Carnegie bought the cottage, there was a family living in it, and they continued to live there until about 1905. And in 1908, it opened to the public, and it became a tourist attraction. Come 1919, when Andrew Carnegie died, Louise approached the trustees of the Carnegie Dunfermline Trust and asked if she could attach a building to the cottage so that people in Dunfermline would not forget who Andrew Carnegie was. And she wanted it to stand as a memorial to him, but also a legacy of what he achieved, so that others may learn from it, others may repeat how well he had done and how he viewed the world. So she wanted people to learn from his actions. So when she opened it, I have a couple of pictures on the presentation at the end, But since then, we have updated it a little bit in 2008. But in 2028, we are going to celebrate 100 years of this hall being opened. It's not 125 years like the Homestead Library is getting this year, which is amazing, but the original Memorial Hall, when it was finished, opened in 1928. Louise Carnegie came along, her family came along, their daughter Margaret, and it was a chance to show off many of the artifacts that they had accrued throughout Andrew's life through various different activities. So these are the original cases, and many of these objects are part of the original collection that were given to us. So things that might be of interest, if we're talking about libraries in particular, this lovely mallet and trowel that we have here were used by his mother, who he absolutely adored, Margaret Carnegie, to put the stone in for the first library that Carnegie built, and that is just up the street from us, about 200 yards up the street in 1881, and they're celebrating in their 140th birthday this year in 2023. And they've done a nice combination here of a very simple mallet, an extremely ornate trowel. And as a mark of thanks, the town said, here's a freedom casket, here's freedom of the town of Dunfermline. And we have this a lot. Here's some more. We call these caskets. I'm aware that the Americans have a different definition of what a casket is. But this harks back to a Renaissance type tradition. Sometimes you'd have saint relics in here, or you may have other secrets and treasures kept here. The Medici family in Italy, for example, had a fair few collection of them. But these are all Victorian. These are from various different cities. So this is in Abergavenny. And as you can see, some of them included images of the buildings that had been built. So when Andrew or Louise went down to open them, this would be the gift to him. Up here we have the first one in England, first library built in England was Keighley up in Yorkshire. Again, look how amazing the Victorian jewellery and the craftsmanship has been on that one. And here's our Irish one, not to forget about Ireland was part of the United Kingdom at that point, the Republic of Ireland. So that's for Waterford. And one of these is actually from just up the road. This is Burn Island. And they actually gave a casket in the same design as the building that had been built. So what I do love about these is they tell all sorts of different stories. And up here we have Pennsylvania State Universities. We've got craftsmen from all over the place with different styles, different types of design on them, made of different things. We've got wooden ones, we have ones designed by Tiffany, we've got gold things, it's incredible. And we do even, on our own labels, mention Homestead Library, Pennsylvania, Braddock Library, Pennsylvania, as we try and celebrate the fact that there was 2,811 libraries created by his wealth. Knowing where the wealth came from is part of us telling that story. And we do talk about the Homestead issues and the strikes that went on there. And along with the libraries that he created, the organs he gave away, the institutions he built up, are all part of the story that's told in this memorial hall. Underneath here, we have lots more shiny things that we're just giving a little bit of protection to during the winter months when we're closed to the public. This is the one for Edinburgh Library. They went all out in Edinburgh, as you'd imagine, with the trowel and with the mallet. So let me come off this phone And Emily, if you can transfer back to the laptop, I'll just finish off the presentation and then we can take some questions if you're up for it.
So can people still hear me again?
Yep, you're good.
That's Emily. That one. So hopefully you now feel like you've been inside that cottage, but there is no second, there's nothing like being here yourself. So please do come and visit and say hello when you come. The weavers in Dunfermline were very skillful. Much of their work was represented at the the International Exhibition in 1851, and some was even on the Titanic, to give you an idea of the quality that they were doing. And Margaret Morrison was the mother who he adored. Between her and his wife Louise are the two women that he often referred to as creating him, making him. His mother, for example, when he was given, Andrew Carnegie was given his first opportunity of an investment of $500 US, while he was still a very young man and only just starting to make a good living, make a living, she put up a mortgage on their house and trusted him that he was making the right decision and was willing to put all that on the line. This is also the lady who left Scotland while her husband, William, really didn't want to go. He wanted to try and find a way of solving this problem of the weaving factories and the weavers being out of work. He thought there was another solution to it, but Margaret took the lead, packed up the family. At that point also had Thomas. So Andrew was 12 and Thomas was about 8. And they went all the way to Allegheny to stay with her twin sisters who had already emigrated out there. So they had someone to go to, but it was still a 3-month worth of travel through the voyage. Even getting to Glasgow from here took several days. So she was the driving force behind the family. Now this is the note that Andrew Carnegie left in the visitor's book when he visited his birthplace cottage in 1909. So although it was a gift in 1895, he didn't come back to St Andrew to Dunfermline until 1909. And he came to the birthplace, the humble home of honest poverty, best heritage of all, when one has a heroine for a mother. So even there, he's acknowledging the importance that she had in his life. Thinking back to where we were upstairs, this is what it originally looked like. So these are postcards from when it opened first as a tourist attraction. Obviously a little bit more sparse and no decoration, not even got the beds in place for us to see. So you can see how much additional things we've added to the place itself to try and create an atmosphere, try and create what it might have looked like during his time. But we're very aware that actually the desk is the only thing that's most likely to have come from the Carnegie family. You can do a full 360 walk tour of the cottage and of the exhibition itself through our website. So please do that if you wish. We move things around now and again, but generally it's as you will find it. And this is where Dunfermline sits and where we are. So again, I'm not sure if you can completely see where we, if you can see my arrow, but in the bottom right-hand corner, you will see a street that goes straight up to about 11 o'clock again, from the bottom right-hand corner called Moody. So Moody Street is where we are. And the top house on the right-hand side is the location of the museum, the cottage, and just opposite the manse, where the minister would have lived. And you can actually still see that lean-to is still sitting on that. This map is from 1823. And if you love maps, here's a wee tip. Look at Google search, National Library Scotland maps. They've digitized all maps for free for people to look at, to use in presentations with full credit, of course, but it's an incredible look at Scotland. If you have any heritage or Scottish ancestry or curious about places, they're brilliant fun. You get lose yourself for hours. So in the top, the biggest building you see on this, it says burying ground. That is our nave and abbey church. So the part on the left-hand side, which is light grey, is 1,000 years old. And the one on the right-hand side is our new church, 200 years old. So that is a feel for what 1823 Dunfermline looked like when Andrew was being born in 1835 at Moody Street. Population between 2,000 and 3,000. Other key people in his life was his uncle George Lauder, who would tell him stories. He was about 20 years older than Andrew, and he would tell him stories about Wallace, Bruce, and Robert Burns. And that cemented Andrew Carnegie's real interest in Scotland. His younger brother, Thomas, really didn't have a strong association with Scotland, and he ended up spending his money buying an island, Cumberland Island off of Georgia or South Carolina. But Lauder, Uncle George Lauder, ran a shop on the high street and educated Andrew and his cousin, who was George Lauder's son, Doddy, also known as George, in the ways of the world. And it really encouraged Andrew's love of history. That's the school he went to, and we talked there about the first penny that he ever earned. Again, it's a Burns poem. Huge fan of Burns, huge fan of William Shakespeare, so much so that he bought Shakespeare and Burns' birthplace, like locations of where they were, land nearby, because he wanted to have it preserved for people to enjoy later on in life. Andrew and his younger brother Thomas in Allegheny City. That is our new abbey. Sorry, that's our old abbey. That's a 1,000-year-old abbey. And on the right-hand side, we have Robert the Bruce's grave. So when they were building the new abbey, which is just to the left-hand side of the old nave, it's attached onto it, they discovered a body and they believe it to be Robert the Bruce. And that led to him being reburied at this site. This all took place in 1820s. So a little bit before Andrew Carnegie was born, but you can imagine the whole town would have been abuzz with it still in the 1830s. They found one of the most well-known kings of Scotland. He loved Dunfermline. He was not born here. He did not die here, but his funeral cortege went from Helensburgh, which is on the west coast of Scotland, and it went through all the central belt of Scotland to come to Dunfermline so he could be buried in this abbey. So here's how the cottage looked in the early 1900s. Again, this is pretty much as it stands now, as I can show you with this picture. And on the right-hand side, you can see in the background our memorial hall where I'm currently sitting. We're a free venue. People can come between 11 and 4 p.m. And we've closed for a few weeks over the winter time because we don't get so many tourists in Dunfermline yet. Hopefully we will now as a city. But we are free for entry and engage with the local school kids. Actually, next week, we're engaging with the library as well. Just up the street, we've got World Book Day in Scotland on the 2nd of March. And so we've got 180 kids sharing between us and the library for a new book that's been written about the Forth Bridge, the rail bridge that goes across the River Forth. So we do love our library friends for sure. This is the opening ceremony of this memorial hall being opened. We've got Louise, who's the lady in black in the middle row, and to her right is her daughter Margaret, and to her left is John Ross, who was the gentleman who was chair of the Carnegie Dunfermline Trust from the start, from Andrew Carnegie appointing him, and there in 1928, 25 years later. This is what it originally looked like in here. The poster at the end is still of Andrew Carnegie, and I can give you a closer look at that as well if you wish. But you can see down the centre, instead of it being clear like we have it for our lectures and for our school visits and such, they had other display cases so they could show off some of the archives and some of the paperwork that we have from Andrew's life. We've got manuscripts and such like downstairs. Much of the family records are actually with the New York Public Library and at the University of Columbia University. But anything that came from Skibo Castle, his Highland retreat, Margaret gifted to the museum here, so we look after that side. And that is the end of my slides. I will come out of the screen. But I'm more than happy to take any questions or observations or listen to your thoughts.
Thank you so much. I'll just mention some things that were in the chat as we were going through. Someone asked, does the loom still work that is in the cottage?
Yes, we have a gentleman who is a master weaver. He's now 80. He's just retired. And he used to weave for the Queen, for the President. There's stuff in the White House from him. But he has retired from there and he does come and do demonstrations with us. It is still a working loom. We pay him to maintain that loom for us. But we are very anxious because he is in his 80s as to how many more demonstrations he's able to do. He's a great communicator. And we've got videos of him, but sadly, we don't know anybody else who can do it. It's a real skill. It's very, very, very complicated.
Someone mentioned that they believe that Jackie believes that your museum has all the benefaction artifacts, such as the caskets and trowels, and the Carnegie Library of Pittsburgh has photos of all of these benefactions.
3D, they're much, much nicer to look at.
All right. Everyone, if you have any questions, feel free to unmute yourself or put them in the chat and I can ask them for you.
So Braddock's Carnegie Library's got 135th anniversary. Excellent, coming up.
Yes.
Can you guys hear me all right?
Yes.
Cool. So I was kind of wondering, the images of the museum there and the Andrew Carnegie House make it seem kind of small, but the area that you're sitting in looks pretty big. I wonder if you could just kind of talk about the size of the whole thing a little bit more.
Yes, me and my colleague, we co-manage here. And so when we arrived, we were surprised at a lot of our marketing material had just been showing the cottage. It's a beautiful cottage. It's very picturesque. It's our USP for sure. But then people come in and then they come into this hall and they're like, oh, I never knew this was here. Oh, I didn't. Even people who live here don't know that this is a museum sometimes. It's written outside, but we're on a hill. So you walk past our offices, which used to be the curator's bedroom, and it doesn't look like much because we're on this kind of slant. But this length, you realize, do you know the story of Dippy? I don't know how many of you are in the Pittsburgh area, but Dippy the dinosaur is, we'll say, the most famous dinosaur in the world, but is a Diplodocus who Andrew Carnegie paid for the excavation of. It's in the Pittsburgh Museum of Natural History. We've got his skull just over there. We've got a cast of the skull there. And there's a full cast of it at the Natural History Museum in London. There's a full cast of it in Berlin. There's one in Vienna. There's one in Buenos Aires. So there's 8 venues throughout the world because Andrew Carnegie tried to educate or help people understand about this marvelous, huge, ginormous animal that had lived on Earth. He wanted to share the knowledge. So when I was doing that with some kids, I thought, it'd be really nice to try and work out what size is it. So that is 27 meters long, a Diplodocus. This hall is 25 meters long. So when Dippy was doing the tour of Britain, we couldn't have it here. I didn't work here at the time, but it wouldn't have fitted physically. But the length of this hall is about 25 meters. I don't know what that is in old money, maybe 70 feet, something like that. So it's not huge. We can fit 80 people in here, which is what we do with our Carnegie lectures. We haven't got 1,000 seats, unfortunately, like the grand Homestead Library, the music hall there. But we do try and use it for all sorts of things. So today we had 30 kids in here learning about Carnegie and a visit to the cottage, but also learning about being a Victorian and what it was like in Victorian age. We use it for naturally for various exhibitions. We can put panels straight down the middle. So we can have art shows and stuff in here. And I believe in the past they've even had ceilidhs and dances and things like that as well.
Well, thank you for that. That helped me get a better picture, and that makes me want to visit even more.
Oh, great. Now, someone sent a picture of Julie with Dippy.
And Marianne asks, where is Andrew buried?
Anyone in the chat know? Let's have a quiz. Oh, let's see if everybody gets it right. So he didn't die in Scotland. He died in America. He died in New York State. So he's actually buried in Sleepy Hollow Cemetery. And Margaret is also buried there.
And April asked, do the bunnies hidden in the rooms have any particular significance to Carnegie?
They do indeed. How many did you see? How many did you spot? We've got 13 of them throughout the building. It's great for the younger visitors. Andrew's first business idea was having his friends collect food for the bunnies. So he had some bunnies that he collected himself. They're all over Dunfermline. We've got 2 public parks and they're everywhere. And I suspect some were naturally using it for food at that time. But he nurtured a few bunnies and more bunnies appeared. And so there was too many of them for him to nurture himself. So he did the old trick of, oh, why don't you help me get some food? And if they got enough food to Andrew's liking, he would name a bunny after one of his friends. He would not give them the bunny. He would maintain the bunny, but have them do the food, do the work and get the food, but still call that bunny by his friend's name. So that's, he claims, was his first business idea. Well, I'm glad somebody has visited. That's great.
Yeah.
Many years ago, I'm sure they've changed a few things around, but we do try and keep it as informative as possible, and that's what we have our lecture. So actually, next month, we've got the Dean of Libraries from Carnegie Mellon University stopping in to give us a lecture. Keith Webster, he's over doing some other business, but we've invited him to come and talk about Andrew Carnegie in education in Pittsburgh and in the States. So through our lectures and through our blogs and other bits and pieces, we try and tell bigger stories, but most people want to come and hear the story. So upstairs, it's before he went to America, before they went on the boat, and then from this alcove all the way around, it talks about his how he survived in America, how he made his money, how he retired down at Skibo, and then how he spent the money. So our hero fund down at the bottom, the philanthropy element, so that's the libraries and all the different trusts that he set up. And then the final alcove we have here is Dunfermline. So that talks about the buildings that we have named after him here, which some he paid for, some he didn't. He didn't really want his name attached to things. He didn't ask for that ever, that I've ever noticed. But people obviously said, yes, it's a Carnegie library. All he asked for libraries, as many of you may know, was just that they would have a sunbeam on it saying, let there be light. But everything else was, he never really said, oh, call everything after me. That's, of course you do. I'm a man with a huge ego. He was a small man, but he didn't have a big ego. Is there anything you'd like to see in here? I can flip back onto the mobile phone if you're feeling, if you want to see anything, or if you're happy.
Does anyone have any parts that they'd like to see?
No, I've only lived in Dunfermline for 4.5 years, Julie. but I love it here, so I am staying here. I'm going to live here.
Marianne asks, why the different pronunciations of Carnegie between New York and Pittsburgh? So we hear Carnegie or Carnegie a lot in the United States.
It's a discussion that many people have. Also, why Pittsburgh? Why not Pittsburgh? Like it's properly pronounced. No, Pittsburgh, you call it Pittsburgh, what we would say.
Oh, okay.
Edinburgh is the same. Borough means town. And did you know who gave the name Pittsburgh? Do you know that story?
I'm sure we'd love to hear it.
Well, just because it's Dunfermline, it's General Forbes in the Battle of, now what was it called? Duquesqueville? The battle of the area that he overpowered the French. He claimed that land for Pitt, who was the Prime Minister at the time. And because he was from Dunfermline, General Forbes, he added a borough at the end, the same as I say we've got Edinburgh and Fraserborough and all these other boroughs. So it was called Pittsburgh when he christened it. But General Forbes was born in Pittencrieff Park, the park I mentioned that Andrew purchased in 1902. So we have this really strong relationship with the Pittsburgh area. So your previous mayor, Perduto, he was over for the COP26 in Glasgow, and he came to visit us and we showed him some of our exciting objects. And hopefully Dunfermline will maybe become a sister city to Pittsburgh now that we are a city. It might be a lovely way of us building on those ties even more, because we've got the Carnegie connection, a man who went there and helped make his wealth, but then spread the wealth around. And we have General Forbes who named the city and started it all off. So it's a lovely kind of connection that Dunfermline has with that part of the States. Thank you. Fort Duquesne?
Duquesne.
Duquesne. Oh my goodness. Do you not
Yes.
pronounce anything correct over there? I do apologize. Right. Fort Duquesne. I'll try and remember that in the future. Yes. So Dunfermline's a place that anybody on that side of the country does need to come and visit. But hopefully some of you other people on the call are also from Carnegie libraries or have connections with it. But if you have any questions or you have any other kind of information you want to talk to us about, I was saying to Emily earlier, I'm going to be doing some Zoom talks throughout this year. And I'm always looking for speakers who have interesting topics related to Carnegie or related to the context of his life or anything like that.
We have a couple more questions. Sandy wants to know about the kitchen in the house. Did they have one?
Just the range, just the fire. That's all they would have had. So there had always been a kettle on there. In Scotland, we grew up in many places that would really just have a fire as your main source of energy, heat, and cooking purposes. So there would always be a pot of water or soup or similar on the go there. So the fire would never normally be put out. And as a weaver, you would keep that fire on even in the middle of summer. Our summers are not as hot as yours, perhaps, in some parts of the States, but they would still have the fire on because they needed to keep that humidity really hot to make sure that threads wouldn't be snapping.
And then Amanda wants to know how we can contact you. Do you mind if I share your email with all the registered patrons, or you can put it in the chat as well?
But our websites and Facebook and stuff are all there to be abused and followed and such like. But no, we're a tiny team here, but we do try and engage with anybody who has an interest in Carnegie. So we'd be very happy to contact or answer questions or hear about your places. If it's stuff that we can add to our research folders and talk about or link to on our Facebooks or our Instagrams and stuff, you know, we talk about the 22 trusts as being our family, but anything that has a Carnegie connection, we jump in and try and celebrate as best we can.
Thank
does the-
you.
We have a tartan. Yes, it's not one that I've been able to, we haven't got products in the shop with it, but they are connected to a family that has a clan plaid tartan type thing. And I know the Carnegie Corporation in New York, actually, they've recently, is it them? They've recently got a plaid, I think, because you can create your own tartans nowadays, and you just register it with somebody, and you can then create your own based on whatever color scheme you wish.
Are you guys doing, or have you done any other lectures virtually?
No, but as I say, we're going to be hopefully doing that later this year. The speakers we've had so far this year, we've started a new series and they've been incredible. And we've just had the audio edited for us. If we get permission from them, from the speakers, then we will share that. One of them is a local librarian, Sharon McCall, who is an expert. She doesn't like to be called that, but she knows a huge amount about Andrew Carnegie and is researching all of the British libraries, because there's 167, nothing compared to the American volume, but trying to find out where they are and if they still exist and such like. We had Sir Tom Hunter, who is a philanthropy, a medal of the Carnegie Medal of Philanthropy, a winner of that in 2013. He talked about his connection to Carnegie and giving money away. He doesn't want to be the richest man in the graveyard. Does any of us? We also had Henry McLeish, who was a former First Minister of Scotland, who now lectures in the States, and he was talking about how Carnegie has influenced education in the States and his understanding of it. And we had someone talking about George Lauder, who was his uncle, who Carnegie set up the college here in his name. That's one place he asked for it to be named Lauder Technical School because of his uncle, in honor of his uncle. And last week we were supposed to have Lord Bruce, but he was sick. So the Lord Bruce, who's of the Robert the Bruce family descendants, they were one of the first trustees of Carnegie's Dunfermline Trust here. And next month we have Keith Webster coming, and then the month after that we have Victoria Connor, who is the archivist at Skibo Castle. So it still exists as a private members club, but they do still have records, and he's the man, himself and Louise had electricity. They had one of the earliest elevators in Scotland, if not the UK, in the castle, and it's a luxurious, I'm told, location, and it is all thanks to Carnegie's money to make it that way.
All right, do you want to answer Nick's question
Yeah.
and then we will sign off?
Excellent. So yes, we do have some family artifacts in our collections. So we have about 5,000 objects, and on display there's probably there's over 500. But as with many museums, much of our display is not, much of our collection is not on display, or space is not big enough. So we have manuscripts, we have lots of things, glass, empty bottles of whiskey. We've got stuff from Carnegie Mellon University, all sorts of golf clubs, robes from his time as the rector at the university, all sorts of different things like that. So if anybody does contact us, we can tell them what we have. We're still trying to get to the bottom of it all, but that's roughly what we have. But much of the private papers, anything from the American side, his house, which is now the Cooper Hewitt Design Museum, he built that house in New York City. So when they left New York, they put a lot of their papers locally to the public library and to the Columbia University. So you'll also get access there. But the great book, if you want to read about Carnegie, David Nassau did an incredibly deep dive on Andrew Carnegie's life. He researched it here, I'm told. He has an incredible bibliography attached to it. It's a big book, but that to me is the one, that's the book I always go to find out information as a starting point. From there through the footnotes, find out more research. So his book is a great starting point for the family, Andrew Carnegie himself. Andrew's biography that he wrote was published after his death. And the rumor is Louise deleted lots of things because some people are still alive, were still alive, and some people who were mentioned in some of the dealings with him. So some of that was taken away, taken out. And it is a little bit of a rose-tinted glasses view of his life. But it was written by himself, so that's his choice if that's what he wants to do. That's a much easier read, it's a quicker read, and you get the gist of the man. But the Nassau biography is probably the best one that's out there at the moment. Thank you all for your attention. It's very kind of you to stay and listen so late. I mean, it's 7:10 here, so, but yeah.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Mark. And thank you for everyone who joined us. I will be sending everyone a recording of the meeting, and I'll share Mark's email if you guys would like to reach out to him as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark.
Thank you, everybody. Good night. Have a good day.